Alright, what's going on, guys? This was the one I was waiting for. A trailer to come in and really cement the context of the overall story in the world that we'll be playing in. We've had the gameplay, but the thing I really hoped we got last night was something to make us ask more questions than it answers. And this trailer did exactly that. So as we get started, hit that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date on all the Elden Ring lore. But we have a lot to get through in this one, so let's get started. To begin our breakdown, we need to actually look away from the trailer and go to the Steam News tab, which had this to say, giving us a little context into what we're about to watch. Now, I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but there are a few big points to look at. First off, in that top line there, a look into the history of Elden Ring's lands between, the Age of Gods. Now we know there's a lot of different ages in the timeline of Elden Ring, and now we know of two. The other being the Age of the Erd Tree as referenced in the Telescope item description. But the other big point to look at in this is that the character there is called the Storyteller. And we'll talk about her more at the end, but for now, let's move on to the trailer. This trailer is assumed to be our intro cutscene, although I don't believe it's the final version. There seem to be quite a bit of cuts, and there's a few other story elements that just seem way too big to overlook. Now, I'm not going to get into that here, but I'll also mention that the music in the background is Margit the Fell Omen's boss theme, and I believe that has some big connotations. But the trailer opens up narrated by this new character, the Storyteller, who says it happened an age ago, and we now know she's referring to the Age of the Gods. We don't know what gods, but the event she's talking about is this betrayal that we just learned about. If you want a deeper dive into what the betrayal possibly is, you can watch this video, but this trailer gives us a much greater insight into the events that caused it. But the next shot has these four cloaked riders speeding through these shaded woods. Now we don't know hardly anything about who these could be, but given the context of what's coming up, one idea I theorized is that these could possibly be the hands of the Fell Omen, and I'll explain that in a minute, because what's coming up requires a lot of investigation. This is Godwyn the Golden, one of the children of Queen Marika and the holder of the Rune of Death. Now, we've talked about the Great Runes in the past, and how they all have different attributes, so it's interesting that his is called the Rune of Death. But there's a bigger question to look into now that we've seen Godwyn, and that is, why does he look so much similar to the blacksmith we see in the 2019 trailer? And personally, I don't think they're the same character. Even though they're seemingly wearing the same clothes, and the fractures of the skin are in the same spot, it's not exactly the same. As you can see, the blacksmith has red hair, while Godwyn's is white, and the fractures on the back of the blacksmith expand much farther than Godwyn's. So I'm not really sold on the idea that these are the same character. But something more interesting to note is what happens next. We see these small masses crawl underneath his skin and escape through the eye, into this black liquid, as the storyteller tells us that Queen Marika was driven to the brink. Now we don't yet know what's going on with his eye here, but we have a few possibilities. First off, we know that his rune was the Rune of Death, and we don't know what it does yet, but the first impression I got from seeing this was that he's looking at his attacker and casting some sort of power or curse on them. Now the only other thing we know about that escapes through the eye is one of the new status effects, Madness. Although I'm not too sure about that one, since usually it manifests as fire. But I want to talk about this line here, that Queen Marika was driven to the brink. And I find it funny that it lines up with the scene of that stuff coming out of his eye, because driven to the brink of madness would make a lot of sense. And I think this line also confirms that she is not an antagonist, because it insinuates that she's against the actions of her children. And that could also be why the stakes of Marika assist the Tarnished. But I want to move on now. The next scene shows us someone very familiar. Margit the Fell Omen placing the crown of who we assume to be Godwyn on a throne. Now this could imply a multitude of things. One, he's placing the crown as a sign of respect to someone he revered. Or two, he's placing it down as a sign of victory over that person. And honestly, I'm not sure. We don't have a lot of evidence for the first one. But if he was the one that killed Godwyn, then that would make a lot of sense. And that is why I said one possible theory about those characters at the beginning riding through the forest is that they could be the hands of the Fell Omen. We know that we encounter Margit for the first time in Stormvale Castle, which is the domain of Godrick, the one who usurped Godwyn. So we need to be on the lookout for more evidence of that. But now I want to take a look at the room, and there's a lot to unpack here. First off, we have 6 thrones for the 6 demigods, and then one small throne at the back which he places the crown on. And that one's really interesting because why would he place the crown there and not on the designated throne to Godwyn? And for that, I'm not sure. In the next scene, we see a siege on this structure built around the Erd Tree. and I assume the room Margit was just in is inside that structure. But we can see it has a lot of Erd Tree imagery and giant statues of the tree sentinels. But we can see it's being sieged by Godrick's army, which is surprisingly much larger than I thought it would be. And I'm still really unsure how Godrick was able to amass such power. Another thing to note in this shot are these giant spears flying down from the castle. And they're leaking some kind of green gas, which we really haven't seen anything close to thus far. But the storyteller asks a question of what could the demigods ever hope to win by warring? And it makes me think it's not so simple as power. But moving on. In the next scene we see the battle between Malenia and Radahn. And as cool as Malenia is, it's General Radahn that we need to look into, since we know basically nothing about him so far. But we see that he uses gravity magic and is proclaimed to be the conqueror of the stars. And I have a theory of how he got this title. If we look at the item description for ancient debris, we know at one point there used to be a temple in the sky above the lands between, and somehow it was brought down to the earth. Now the only way I see this happening is through the use of gravity magic, and I think a great way to earn the title of Conqueror of the Stars would be to bring down the Sky Temple. But another very interesting use of his magic is allowing him to ride a horse that he has no business being on. And man, it just looks goofy. But if he can manipulate gravity like that, perhaps he can make himself a lot lighter. But Malenia and Radahn are seen as the strongest warriors in the battle. We still don't know what the red hair means, but we know that both of them are servants of someone else. And it makes me incredibly interested to learn more about Mikola, the one who Malenia serves. But we see that Radahn has these golden eyes, which is very interesting, and may or may not be a sign of the guidance of grace. But we can see that the two of them locked horns in combat, which means they're evenly matched. But the most interesting part of this scene is what Malenia does at the end. After being impaled by her sword, she uses this kind of spell, or magic of some sort, to create this giant flower bud that honestly looks like it's made out of her hair. Now in the network test we saw nothing that looked even close to this kind of magic, so perhaps this is some kind of power that's exclusive to her. But either way, it's just cool, and it seems to bring about the stalemate between her and Radahn. But now we get to the fun part, the character that shocked everybody in this trailer, the storyteller, or as we know her, Melina. There's a lot to break down here, so let's start with her relation to our maiden. We don't yet know who or what the storyteller is, but what's interesting is the fractured spirit off to her left. That is Melina, and Melina, as we know, is a broken spirit manifested at sites of lost grace to act as the maiden for the tarnished. So it's likely that this spirited apparition that we see is a detached agent from the storyteller sent to bring about a new Elden Lord. But it raises a lot of questions. Why does Melina look the way she does when we see her? Why does she not take the same form as the storyteller? And to that I don't know. Perhaps it's to hide her identity. And why does she have the dragon wing tattoo instead of the mark that we see on the apparition to the left? And could this also be who Melina refers to as her mother, who gave her her purpose long ago inside the Erd Tree? These are all questions that we need answers for, and I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for. But we can make a few observations about the storyteller herself. Number one, she has this striking white hair that is also similar to the royal family. And again similar to the royal family are these cracks in her skin. Her hat seems to have these crystals coming off the side, and it almost looks like it's made out of snow or ice. Strangely, she has 4 hands, which is likely representative of the multi-spirited nature of the storyteller. We can also see 2 giant braids of hair going down the sides, and it does seem to be darker than the white on her head, so maybe that's where Melina gets her pink from. But as of right now, that's pretty much what I can gather from this. And I gotta say, man, this was amazing. It completely blew away my expectations, and I feel was the perfect final announcement before we get the game in February. If we don't hear anything else until then, I will be happy. But what do you guys think? How did you feel about this trailer, and was there anything I missed? I'm sure this is deserving of a frame-by-frame analysis, and I can tell you guys right now, we got a lot of good speculation to look forward to. But anyways guys, that's gonna pretty much do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll catch you in the next one.